Welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, where we share the latest sales performance insights through in-depth discussion with experts. Season 3 of our show is your backstage pass to discovering how today's most successful sales and revenue ops teams support go-to-market strategy and improve sales performance. Plus, we'll explore what we can learn about incentives from different industries more broadly. Subscribe to hear how leaders are unlocking new growth, implementing the latest compensation trends, and their priorities for improving go-to-market performance. I'm your host, CEO of Form AI, Nabil Alzam. Tana Jackson is an accomplished global leader with over 18 years of experience driving results in revenue and business operations. Tana is most recently the VP of Operations at Upright Labs and has spearheaded initiatives in her past, achieving 42% revenue increase, elevating company earnings from 95 to 125 million through the implementation of effective sales processes. Tana, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you join us. Tana, welcome to the show. Excited to just dig right in. I think we have a lot of interesting stuff and a lot of interesting topics to cover today. Before we do that, I always like to call out the fact that getting into this profession, being on the operational side of a revenue organization, a go-to-market organization, is not something we all wake up as a 5-year-old thinking that that's what we're going to do. So I'd love to hear your story, how you got here and your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I always say it's cool that we got a cool name now with RevOps because it's definitely a journey that I did not say I wanted to do, didn't know I could do. So I started in healthcare, started in nursing, and then I made a pivot into technology and SaaS, B2B, that kind of stuff. But I've always had that work smarter, not harder philosophy, no matter what it is. Like, how can I get to the end goal as quickly and as efficiently as possible? So that's kind of the brain that you have because you're a constant problem solver in revenue operations. You're constantly trying to make things better, easier, more efficient. So that's kind of how I ended up here. It was more, I've worked with so many different hats, the jack of all trades, and all of a sudden, great, all the things. I could do all the things. And now it's called RevOps. People ask questions, how did you get into this? Or how can I get into it? Learn everything, ask the questions, always wonder what the people next to you are doing or the other departments are doing, because then you get the holistic view of the business. That's the key with revenue operations, is that holistic business oversight. So it's definitely very interesting and can go many different directions.
Yeah, that empathy to the roles and all the different touch points in the go-to-market journey, right? All the individuals and responsibilities that occur and how you bring it together. So yeah, without curiosity, I don't know how you kind of get that knowledge. It's very difficult.
Fortunately for me, working in different industries and then different types of business, small, large, PE-backed, startup, you get different flavors. Everybody runs a business differently, but the key foundational piece of it for RevOps, your foundation of a company is the foundation. Every business runs funnel all the way through sales, post-sale, no matter where you are. It's basically learning that business. What do they do? What is the industry? What are the key pain points for that business? But the foundation is there. So if you can learn the front to back business operations piece of foundationally, how does a business run? Then you can step into it. And the only stuff that really you need to learn is that business particularly. So even for me, I think when I made that pivot, the verbiage was my biggest piece, from patient to customer, because the businesses all ran the same.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamentals are what the customer is and what their journey with your business.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we step back and you think about, revenue operations, we're building a system and supporting a system to enable us to get this end state. And that end state is really the prediction of where we're going to be, whether it's that cycle for the year or the quarter or even a little bit longer term. To determine that end state, I mean, to do so with any sort of precision is basically driven off of data. When we think about forecasting, I think one of the things that, very excited to dive into with you today, given your background and your experience here, is like, when you think about data-driven forecasting and precision, would love to hear your perspective on what's mattered to you and how you've done that to date.
Sure. You have to have the right data to make the decisions for the business. If you're operating without any transparency into what's happening, it's really, really hard to make your best guess because everything is hypothetical. Your CRM is your Rolodex of customer information, and that's where it starts. You have to have the right customer information on top of all the revenue generating information. So if we think about that forecasting, the key piece to sales, they need to know what is happening in the pipeline, what is happening in the forecast. That determines how much is the company to scale? How much do we think that we're going to have in bookings coming in for the year? We report weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, all of this. But then it helps all the teams. So you know how much overhead that you need to bring in, The CX team and the account managers are going to know how many books of business are we about to close? Do we have bandwidth to take on this many more customers? Even at the top level down, if you don't have that key data correct, you're going to make really poor business decisions. I mean, we've all seen it. We've seen great business decisions made, and we've seen really poor business decisions made. And a lot of that comes with that data hygiene. How do you keep that data constantly fresh? And again, that's RevOps. RevOps is your swim lane of, hey, we're going to make sure that you guys are putting this stuff in. We're going to hold your forecast meetings. We're going to hold you accountable. We're going to come to you and be like, hey, this doesn't look right. That key piece for me and my experience right now is with that pipeline management, just making sure people are following your process. Whatever your opportunity, your deal process is, your sales process, whatever you want to call it, you have to make sure the teams are following that. I walked into the position I'm in currently. There wasn't any adoption in Salesforce. There wasn't really a sales process that aligned with what the sales team were doing. So they had no accountability to follow anything. You couldn't predict close dates. You really couldn't look at it. The executive team was still in an Excel workbook. And now, fast forward a year later, our Salesforce now is the center of truth. It's the only data in the company that anybody believes. But it is that constant eyeball every single week, pushing close dates, looking at how many times we've pushed, closing things out, getting people to follow those processes.
That's actually a really good point. So data cleanliness obviously is at the heart of any sort of forecast and any predictability. And I think even like all the other downstream aspects of running a sales organization, including sales compensation, right? Like you need
Oh, yeah.
accurate data, otherwise garbage in, garbage out. But I guess you've done that through process compliance and really kind of driving the ship. I'm curious, are there other data sources that you've brought in to kind of append to the existing data to make it more robust and
Oh,
more?
absolutely. I think the biggest part with the data itself, after you establish whatever that process is that you're going to be, and you've established the data that you need to make the business decisions, it's adding your validation rules, automating it. I'm a huge enrichment person. So we know we have Zoom Info. So of course we hooked Zoom Info up and it's on a weekly enrich. So any new accounts that we put in, it's constantly refreshing those contact changes. Things have gotten so great now with AI. All of these systems have some kind of AI enrichment that you can constantly just refresh that data. So I do feel that that is up to the business. What are your requirements? I've worked in companies where they did not allow anybody to create an account. It had to go through RevOps or your Salesforce team or your HubSpot team. Because again, you're cleaning up messy stuff because people always put the data in. But if you have an enrichment tool, you're able to kind of keep that data going no matter who puts the accounts in. I think the other part too is making sure that you have some kind of audit going, whether it be missing fields that you require, your validation rules, any data inconsistencies that you can help flag. So that way you're keeping people accountable for it. That's the biggest part of making sure that the data hygiene is upkept.
So on that note, who do you think in the organization should own the data hygiene?
RevOps, absolutely. I mean, but you should have like the combination. I think everybody owns it. It's everybody's data and everybody's responsibility, but you have to have that ownership and who is responsible for making sure it stays clean. Because it's a constant. We've got apps in our stuff for like duplicates that's constantly running deduping because it happens. I mean, I walked into this with like 5,000 contact duplicates. So no wonder we couldn't figure out who a primary contact was. But if you don't have eyeballs looking at that stuff and actually going through your data, it's really hard to figure out what you need and what you don't need. So I do feel, RevOps, sales ops, whoever that is that's owning the customer relationship up front should have some kind of responsibility with that. If you don't have a business analyst or a data analyst that's just data, then you're kind of that person that owns it up front.
Yeah. And so I guess there are some data sources that are going to be coming upstream into RevOps, whatever the system that you're using to kind of own that data hub. How do you work and partner with those stakeholders in the organization to hold them accountable to giving you the right data?
I'm a huge gatekeeper, sometimes to a fault. Because again, and I'm an extreme owner, so I extreme own my data, especially when your executive team is like, this is the cleanest data in the company. We need to keep it that way. So anytime somebody comes to me, if it touches Salesforce, it's like, wait, what is the data you're talking about? What are you trying to do? How do you think this is going to benefit us? Because again, the more systems that you have with all of this data going in and out, the more possibilities you have of bad data or duplicate data or just irrelevant data, and it just creates noise. Perfect example is HubSpot. You have this opportunity to update contacts, companies, all of those kind of things, but we found some of it was updating incorrectly. Or you want to add an app because we want to pull all of the stuff into Tableau or something and we want to analyze it, but then we're going to push it back. No. So it's kind of one of those things where you really have to understand the whys, the what, how is this going to go in? Or you end up in that spider web mess of all of these things, and then you don't know what's right and what's wrong. Where is it coming from? I've been in companies where there was one integration user for 10 systems going into Salesforce. So then you get somebody saying, hey, all of this is incorrect, but you have no idea where the incorrect data is even coming from because there's too many things pushing and pulling, and you have no way to articulate which is the actual one that is creating the wrong data. So a lot of it is having those SOPs and the documented mappings. So, but then also making sure all of that stuff is separate. So if something is wrong, you can actually articulate which one is the one causing it.
On that note, I guess what are the red flags that you've seen in data that have these cascading massive impacts that can throw off a forecast or ultimately throw off advice or kind of direction from a strategy perspective that organization sets?
My biggest pet peeve, and it's going to sound so minor, but it's so big, is the close dates on deals. It drives me bananas when it's just wrong. It's just wrong. And then you're constantly pinging these people, push your close dates. Is this open? Should it be closed? What's going on? At a certain point in the company, it's like, how long your sales cycle is. If you're working with the customer, you have a good idea when you're going to get signature. So I think for me, it's monitoring, those pushing close dates, the age of things sitting there, like how long has something been sitting without any activity on it, missing fields, a lot of requirements and validation rules. I think those are the big ones for me, especially if you're monitoring that forecasting and pipeline. You need that stuff to be clean every week, every month, or your sales team is going to have no idea what's going on. I mean, that impacts all of the things that we talk about when it's the pipeline management and the forecasting. If that stuff is not consistent or not putting it in the CRM, that's the other big, big piece of it because somebody could be sitting there with their little list of all of this stuff in Excel and you really wouldn't know.
Especially in more legacy industries where they're not living in the computer and in the CRM on a day-to-day
Or
basis.
it's new and they didn't have
As
to do it.
customer.
And now it's like, hey, you have to go put this in. They're like, oh. So then they, avoid doing that. So I think those are the big. But then, if you're building your relationships and that stuff and the trust with the teams, you can have those tough conversations. The role of RevOps being that synergy in the middle. You've already hopefully built those relationships, that open communication. You've given them the process, you're coaching, and they know that, you have their best interest and the trust is built. Then you can kind of do that annoying stuff of like, hey, can you please go do this? Or hey, I really need you to update this, and nobody gets offended by it. So
Back to your point on like the type of data, like the close date on an opportunity. I mean, that being off is it's such a big symptom to just this much bigger underlying problem of like gap in sales process. Because if you're off on your predictability at an opportunity level, at the rep level, where they're the closest to the account, they're supposed to be following very specific process, and we're seeing failures there. I mean, I agree that's kind of a very common immediate red flag that something is off with the way that we hold our reps accountable to process, the way that we measure and track. So in order to do this properly and have this data collection and actually establish as a foundation of trust, you need to have that cross-team collaboration, whether it's the sales reps that don't report to RevOps, right? They effectively report to the sales management and you're kind of trying to enforce and push all the way to finance and marketing teams that really impact everything that we do and that we're collecting. And so what are those obstacles to that effective cross-team collaboration when it comes to kind of building that forecasting and building that data pipeline?
to be successful in RevOps, you have to be able to work as a team and be collaborative and have over communication. I think that's one of the biggest success criteria for anybody in operations or RevOps because you can't single-handedly do everything for everybody because it's not in your privy to be able to do all of that stuff. So the responsibilities of other leaders in the company with their departments, you can help them, you can collaborate. The biggest obstacles I think is the misalignment of goals because everybody has their, blinders on. They're focused on what their goal is, what they need to achieve for their company. Finance is not thinking about what marketing is doing. They're thinking about what sales is doing, but they're more worried about the customer billing, invoicing, getting rev rec right. And then you've got your sales team. They just want to sell because they need to hit quota. They've got revenue goals that they need to hit targets for bookings. And you have marketing that's worried about their MQLs. So it is kind of one of those things that it becomes your responsibility as a RevOps leader to tie that together between the swim lanes so that everybody knows how it impacts each other. And then it's the different tools piece. We kind of talked about that a little bit. If you have every department, and I've been there, that they want a different tool for what they specifically do, but it doesn't talk with the other ones, it creates a mess. My strategy is always to over communicate. I will over add people to emails. I will over blast things out to the entire company because what you find really interesting is the people that are doing the work, your frontline people that have boots to the ground, they just want to know what's going on with the company. They appreciate the transparency and the communication. Then if they have feedback, they can give you, solutions, some really great innovative ideas. And then at the higher level, even though they may not want to know in the weeds, but you're kind of just informing them, following your project management skills, your RACI, like inform them of what's going on so it's not a surprise because you will find probably, I don't know, 50% of the time when you have an initiative that you're trying to push forward, somebody is going to be like, oh, that's going to impact this. Or I was working on this and it's going to touch this.
I think one of the barriers that we've seen is like these silos end up existing, each measuring, to your point, success in different ways.
Hmm.
And they're not even necessarily speaking about the metrics in a consistent fashion. So that communication sometimes doesn't even resonate because they don't think about it that way. So it's almost like, establishing this common language of metrics and success criteria. I'm curious how you've done that and at what points you've done that to maximize the success of these project initiatives that are, again, cross-functional, big, long-term projects that kind of span many quarters of years and
Oh,
something.
absolutely. So one of the biggest initiatives I've done a few times is the CPQ implementation, and the impact of the CPQ. That touches everything.
Beginning to end.
Now,
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things where you have to start talking about it and saying the words and the understanding before you've even signed with a vendor. Because if you're in the hot seat of RevOps and you know the quote to cash process and your sales team and what's happening with that, you already pretty much know the pains and needs of what needs to be done. But you also need to be, I hear you. Let's try to find a solution for that. And getting your champions. So you want people excited about it. So when you say, guess what? They're like, oh, finally, finally, finally. So a lot for me is, again, it goes back to that communication. While you're doing the work on the background and vet all of these things and figure things out and find requirements and get the buy-in and talk to stakeholders and budget, you can still be building those collaborative conversations. So CPQ, I think, has been one of the big, huge ones because it impacts the business in a positive way. If it goes wrong, it's going to be negative, but you want it to be positive. So you spend all of that time articulating things. The change management piece for any project is the most important. Because if you want it to be successful, you have to make sure everybody knows what's going on. And it is almost exhausting sometimes because you feel like you're repeating yourself. You're having the same conversations. You have to keep going, and you're going to get the ones that push back, or you're going to have to go say it to somebody new because there's been turnover in the company. So it's just this constant circle of trying to push your initiative forward. But I think that's the biggest part of a project of that magnitude. You have to collaborate with everybody along the way, every department, every leader. Everybody needs to know what's going on, project management, project plan. But that's the only way it's going to be successful. So I think for me, that if I can push more on change management and communication, while we're working on all the other things and just making sure that people are on the boat with you and they're on the journey with you, then that is what leads to a lot of successful projects being able to push forward. That's a pretty big one, but even your smaller ones. So it could be a simple automation, something that you just want to make it easier for the users. But if you do something like that and everybody's like, what just happened? Then you failed as a leader because you didn't communicate it out.
It's interesting because we see this all the time on RevOps and sales comp, and like you almost have to build that muscle in the way of operating just on a consistent basis because there's no such thing as like, I mean, CPQ is a perfect example of like a massive project. Okay. You're gonna have these types of buckets of work that are digitally transforming the way you operate. But the premise of RevOps, the premise of the way that we manage and execute in sales across the spectrum from enablement to sales compensation, it changes part of the equation. It's literally every day there's managing change. And so, the organizations that we've seen work very, very well is when they kind of build that change management layer into their day-to-day operations and over communicating, to your point, having that common language. So yeah, everything you said just, resonates because I think it's certainly one of the biggest parts of the role is keeping the ship moving while it's
We
constantly being
we
revealed.
multiple hats. I mean, that's the beauty of RevOps too, is we could have all these different colored hats on our heads because like you said, every day, every minute, it's something different. There is no one thing that we ourselves, I think, have our own goals in RevOps. Again, we try to align our projects with the business goals and try to stick to that. Or, you're helping with other things. But unlike other departments that have one function, we have to function as multiple different functions to benefit all of the other teams. So it's never a dull moment.
That is both the difficult part, but also the rewarding part of the job, right? It's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
okay. So speaking of tooling and kind of these bigger projects, you think about and going back to forecasting, with so many forecasting tools and technologies that are available in the market, as a revenue operations, sales operations leader, how do you approach or think about the framework in approaching the selection of the tools, the tech stack that you build out for your organization?
I've taken this approach of less is more because I've been in organizations where there's 200 tools. And again, it's really hard when we go back to data integrity to keep your data aligned if you have multiple things all over the place. It creates the silos of data. It doesn't integrate with everything. The stuff is spread out everywhere. You're still going to have to pull things from all these other places. So for me, when it comes to the Rev Tech stack, it is what are the needs? What do we actually need? How is it going to play with, if your main tool is Salesforce, HubSpot, your CRM, you want to make sure whatever you get plays nicely with that and plays nicely with whatever your finance tool is, because those are your two main, your customer relationship and then your money. So you don't really want to mess with those too often. So for me, it's more what are the requirements? What do we need? What are we going to use it for? And how is it going to play in our systems? I'll be the first one to go into Salesforce's App Exchange and download something. If it's a freemium, I'm all for it. If it's going to benefit me, it's dashboards, it's reporting, it's some other little thing that I need. But then your bigger stuff, we've got integrations for our project management software. We've got Zoom Info for enrichment, and it all kind of flows. It all works. But I've been part of those ones where you just do something and you're like, oh my goodness, this is definitely not what we thought. This isn't what we were sold. It's not doing all of these different things, and that just goes back to not asking the right questions or, not getting the true what do we need and how is this going to work? Because you can't make a system work for bad processes versus you want to create a good process with a system that supports the best practice processes. Because I have seen, and a perfect example is a compensation tool. I'm not going to call it out, but there was a particular way that the company was doing sales compensation, but they were trying to force this tool to follow the way that they did sales compensation. And it just wasn't going to do it. Like what you're doing with the sales compensation and how you're doing it, just the methodology behind it didn't make a lot of sense. And then you tried to get a tool because you wanted to make it easier, but you're trying to break this tool and customize this tool and do all these things with this tool to do a wonky process versus change the wonky process and then get a tool to support a best practice process. And then it would have worked like really well. So I think that is the balance of the business of how a business is doing something versus you want a system to make it easier, but maybe you should tweak your process to make that easier and then find the system to support it. So it's
Yeah.
that balance.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, and this is not just specific to sales comp. I think just broadly, like process should be defined towards a best practice, both operationally, how it best serves the customer, the ability to onboard and train internal team members to do so. But you define your best practice, and then yeah, I agree. You map it to technology, and I really like what you said earlier on being very quick to iterate and kind of test out technology that doesn't really impact the core data pipeline. And so I just to kind of restate what you described, and I think is a very elegant way to think about this. But it's like if it's in the core data pipeline and it's like core piece of plumbing to that like that artery, you really need to think twice, three times, four times before you ever make a change. But if it's a consumer and a output from the main artery and it's not feeding back in, I mean, there's a lot more flexibility in how many tools that you can kind of think about and you
You absolutely.
and I agree, less is more on the main artery because every time you need to make a change, you need to make a change in all the cascading, elements like that data pipeline. I mean, this is an interesting piece, and going back to your point on the sales comp, and not to pick on that, but just broadly process. So in that case, and maybe didn't have the best practice for their sales comp process, and they were trying
Right.
to force it into a tool that just obviously he's not going to be able to handle that. But what happens in certain cases when the best practice process is so unique to that business and is so convoluted that there is not tooling available? How do you think about technology supporting that kind of not standard best practice, but truly best practice for that business, whether it's an innovative thing? Yeah.
That's a really great question. It is kind of one of those, the out of the box thinking has to come into play. Like, what pieces of it can you make easier? What pieces of it, unfortunately, are you going to be stuck having to manually do or manually update? I think we have so many gazillions of tools and resources and stuff that we are able to kind of maybe push something together. We just went through a huge contract cleanup. All of these contracts that we had were in all these different folders, all of this different stuff. We couldn't find all of our MSAs, whatever. So we actually built out an AI contract prompt that pulled all of the contracts based on keywords through, it was this huge query. It took a little bit of engineering and all this stuff to get it done, but they were able to actually query through all of these hundreds and hundreds of project folders to find all of the key documents and then actually make a copy of that PDF and pull it into one folder. Now, again, unfortunately, because we can't trust everything with AI, we can't just pull, those fields that we need, like contract start and end date, amount, because we really do need to read the contracts. So unfortunately, the manual piece of it is we have to go and look at all of these contracts and actually pull them and reorganize them and stuff like that. So I think it does take, again, that collaborative. If you don't have the answer, go talk to a bunch of people because we've got great communities and everything else out there. Somebody else may have an answer for you because we didn't have that answer. We were just manually just going to do it, suffer through it, just charge through it like, oh, we just have to do it. But then somebody else had this idea like, hey, let's see if we could build this AI prompt to actually query through all of this stuff for you. And lo and behold, it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so on that topic, I guess, like, how else do you see AI machine learning kind of disrupting or transforming the way that you're running?
Scary.
Yeah, RevOps. Yeah.
It's scary, but at the same time, it's almost invigorating because I use ChatGPT all the time, for a lot of things. I wish I could like automate more of my life with it at this point. But the way that it's going to be able to help us, because you're still going to have people oversight. Like I am one of those proponents of it. I don't think it's going to take over a lot. I think it should help with things. We use, we've got Copilot in Salesforce. I use Scribe, which is an AI, to help create SOPs and all of those things from touching and screen recording and everything, which is amazing. But I think that it should be helping you. If it's automating emails, if it's automating tasks, if you have repetitive things that you're constantly doing, this should be able to help. But then even the contract example, you never know what it can actually do until you go say, hey, do you think we can do this? We did create, out of ChatGPT, a contract reading prompt to where it can pull those fields, but then we still have to validate it. So I just think that AI, as scary as it is, because I do have people around me that are in cybersecurity and they're anti-AI because they're like, this just breaks every possible cybersecurity code that you could possibly think of. And their companies don't use it and will not use it because of that. But I'm like, how can you not? Like, this is amazing. So I think that the balance in our world right now with AI, the possibilities are endless, which is scary. But at the same time, this is just, it's here and we can't really get away with it at this point, not being affected by it one way or the other.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and it really is about kind of thinking about where's the human in the loop in the process, and then like the rest of it is kind of that AI supported
Hmm.
motion. I mean, for me, the reason why I started the company was because of that. It was like, hey, there's an opportunity to kind of leverage AI in a way where you can enable that, that sales comp team member to basically do 10x or 100x what they're able
Yeah.
to do before.
Oh, the way that it can look at forecasting as well, because we've got the AI generated in forecasting. You can throw your forecasting pipeline in AI right now and say, hey, give me an analysis of this. And you're just like, wow, that would have taken me an hour to do. And you just spit it out in like 2 minutes. And
Yeah.
it's pretty accurate. So, I mean, some of it definitely helps, especially if you don't have a big team. If you think about it for the things for yourself, you don't have time to do all of these things and spend all of this time doing it how we did old school. If you need to do an Excel analysis and it takes 50 tabs on an Excel and you've got to do all this stuff, now you could throw things in and get it done, in less than a minute. And for the most part, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. To me, I think that this is just going to impact like the size of RevOps organizations does not need to be the same scale and depth to be able to produce similar outputs. It's going to make the function of RevOps more accessible to even smaller companies in a lot of different ways, right? Okay, so kind of shifting off, and from a technology perspective, maybe the kind of final topic here before we get into the next segment, bringing agility into the way that you build out your processes is something that I think very few teams proactively think about, and at a detriment because change is the default motion, especially as like change accelerates. So, given how much faster markets are shifting, how much faster technology is changing the way that we operate, how are you thinking about building that agility?
The key to that right now, just because we know everything is ever changing, whether it be environmental, macro economy, internally, whatever it is, it's the adaptability. You have to be adaptable and be able to adopt that forecast model to adapt to whatever the change is. We get changes all the time. And yeah, you kind of stomp your foot like, oh, but I have that other one just running like an engine, and now I've got to change and I've got to pivot to something else. But I think if you are open to changing and the adaptability, then you have to do those regular updates to keep everything within real time. I think scenario planning is a big thing too. Just being prepared for best case, worst case, if that doesn't work, having those different scenarios that you can look at. I love to always say, okay, there's always going to be a 10%. Give myself a 10% little flexibility percentage there to where something may be up or something may be down within that range. I just think that when we see everything that's happening, businesses have to be able to be quick to change that stuff because what you were doing a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago is not going to work now. And then what we need in 6 months, 2 months, 3 months from now, or a year from now is not going to be the same. So being able to have that scalable system, process, whatever that is, to see forecasting down the road or roadmap that to change, you have to have that flexibility.
Agility ties to this a little bit, but we know no forecast, no prediction you're going to make is going to be perfect. Adopting and learning from that failure is so critical. So, how do you recommend teams conduct postmortems or leverage the data that they're going to glean from the mistakes of the missed forecasts in order to improve their future accuracy?
Have the conversations. I think that people ignore not having the bad conversations or they just talk about the bad stuff. So it's reviewing in those postmortems, review the data. Where was it wrong? What was the assumptions that we had? Was it misaligned? We had, I'll give an example, the first quarter. And again, this is more of Salesforce adoption and, getting people to follow a new process because we implemented an entirely new sales process. So they actually had to follow stages and requirements and these things. We were off our forecast by like $8 million. Like I hit the end of the quarter and I was like, how? But again, it goes back to the process, accountability, making sure everybody is on the same ship as you, and then going back and giving the feedback. So if you have your key people that you're like, okay, I noticed that this is going on, having those conversations. But then also, what I realized is a lot of people don't always know what this means, but they're scared to ask those questions. If we're talking about it's a quarterly forecast or a monthly forecast, and we're talking all this corporate jargon to people that maybe are not in that corporate world. I had one that said, well, what does quarterly mean? Yeah, which is interesting. This happens because, again, in my industry right now, they're not business people. They're not salespeople in that retrospect. They're SMEs for things. So I think it's getting people to understand those definitions. Like you said, speak that language to understand why it's important. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? How does it affect your job? How does it affect the business? And those are those postmortem missed forecast calls. And some of it is difficult, but I do think that if you're setting up those regular cadences, you're having those pipeline and forecast meetings, you're sending out those automated reports to tell people like, hey, this is overdue, move it. Is it open? Is it closed? You have some accountability and somebody actually monitoring that stuff. That's kind of where it gets better.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think the best thing you can do is learn from mistakes, learn from failure. 100%. Okay, so I love to do this segment that we're calling the hot seat, where we put you in the hot seat. And so how it'll work is I'm basically going to read out or call out a general theme, general topic, and if you're passionate about it, you have something that you have a very unique perspective on. I'd love to hear like a takeaway, a hot tip that you think is useful for everyone in the audience that's listening. So, uh,
Perfect.
we're ready.
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay. Uh, Forecasting frequency debate. Monthly, quarterly, real time? What's your perspective?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say, 1, the size of your sales team, depending upon how big or small it is. I think that a smaller one, you can get away with doing it weekly because then it keeps you accurate. It gets them on a regular cadence. It gets the muscle built of like, hey, this is regular. They have to monitor this stuff. If you have a larger org, I'm going to tend to be more monthly because quarterly, you're already past it. You shouldn't even, you should look at it quarterly, but have your quarterly targets, but monthly because you're going to have all those opportunities that fall if you don't have, again, somebody being accountable and saying, you need to go do this and you're tracking it. Another one would be, how far are you from your booking goals to not? Because if you're exceeding your booking goals, you're going to be a little bit more lax, like, oh, we're good. But if you're struggling to get those goals and you need to be on it. And I've
But you need to almost accelerate the forecast. Yeah.
Yes, then you've gotta be, like, hypersensitive and hyper focused on it because you want to know that stuff. I mean, we've been in that hot seat when you're in quarter end and you're trying to push a deal at the last minute to get it because you wanna hit that booking number, and you're pulling every hat trick you have out, and you've got everybody on call till midnight. Like, deal desk is ready, everybody is ready, we're just waiting, we're like, "Where is it at? Where's it at? Where's it at? I need the signature." So, yeah, I think all of that stuff the business dictates.
On a similar vein, so the not just the forecasting frequency debate, but the forecasting granularity. Is that mimic what you just said in terms of like the granularity of the metrics that you're tracking, the closer you are versus the further you are from your overall objective?
Yeah, well, and I think too, it depends upon your sales methodology. If you're following MedPIC or something like that, and what are your requirements? If you have really loose requirements that you don't really require a billing contact and you don't require the contract start and end dates or whatever, you don't even require a signature, then, you're going to be messed up later with finance because they're going to be mad at you for not getting that stuff. But if you have like very specific requirements of information and you need to get that information in, and that's what you're following in your pipeline management because you want them to follow that specific sales process, then you're going to be a little more granular. I lean more in on making sure we have the correct primary contact, next steps. Where are you in the process? Where are you in procurement? Is the close date correct? Is this really a good time frame? But having those conversations because you're relying on your sales team who's talking to the customer, they should know all of that. If they're doing the right discovery and having the right conversations, that information is there or should be. But I will always say, because I laugh at all of the memes of, sales anti-admin work. They don't want to put stuff in the CRM, but it's like during these pipeline forecasting calls, you're forcing them to. So it's like, it is kind of your time to be like, "Hey, you didn't put this in, but put it in." So, I really do think it just depends upon what is the stuff that you need at that time. Because you already know if you're dealing with a company that has to go through a long procurement process, you can't really fight with that.
Okay, so kind of related, human judgment versus AI in forecast.
I think we need both. I do think that AI can help you with the data part of forecasting. Like you could throw in an Excel sheet or throw your data in your CRM and say, hey, predict to me how much we're going to close, what's coming, where are the red flags. We've got the opportunity copilot where you can say, predict this on an opportunity score. But the AI isn't having the conversations with the customer. So your humans still have to be able to say, when am I going to get this? What do we need? How do we need to negotiate? What is the pricing? What is the discount? All of those sales levers that we pull to get a deal. You got to have a little bit of a balance.
Do you think that that's going to be true in like 2 years when you can just ingest your call recordings and have like the AI pick up on?
Just gonna say, I'm like, but the way I see call insights now, because you can plug that stuff in. I mean, a lot of the CRMs have that. We have it where you get your call insights and you can put in your keywords and your buzzwords. That's actually a really good idea. I haven't even attempted to go down that yet of like taking our call recordings and throwing them in. I mean, that I could see that coming, but if you're gonna take call insights and plug them in, you're still gonna have to have that human touch of the human having the conversations.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I think this is an interesting one in the sense of the the human is kind of still in this process until us as humans in general are okay with not interacting with other human beings, right? Right. Yeah, and so I think there's still to be humans in sales, but the interesting part is you could argue that the forecasting is almost could be shifted 100% to AI, and then the humans just have to act on that to either accelerate by doing X, Y, and Z in a sales process, or just recognize it's the date and work towards it. But I mean,
That's an interesting take because I do look at different situations that we have currently. We've got email insights and we have phone insights that it's pulling these buzzwords out, but it's not necessarily going to flag and saying, hey, they're talking about this deal. This could be at risk. Now, if we could put those two things together, I could definitely see where AI would make that connection and just be able to, you know, I'll visualize it on the side of a Salesforce opportunity and AI is telling you like, hey, this opportunity is at risk because of this conversation or this email reference here. That would be amazing. I would never have to talk to anybody in my role. I would just be able to go and look at that stuff and figure it out. So that's
100%. I mean,
very cool.
and one of the things that I'm curious that again on this topic, but one of the things that I find that's the biggest deception or the biggest issues that happens in forecasting is that the sales rep or the individual that owns that account makes assumptions that they think are, and but again, you can argue it's cognitive dissonance or whatever it is, but they hear something, they make an assumption, and then, a month down the line, that assumption kind of like solidifies into fact when they never actually confirmed with the prospect, with that organization on that element. And so you then kind of like overweigh certain parts of the forecasting, right? We think that there's this compelling event because of the inferred outcome that rep made.
Right.
And this is where kind of AI can truly like dissect that because you could have it like in that moment analyze all the data and assess, is that fact actually true? Is that fact?
Absolutely.
So it really could change like significantly in terms of the forecasting at the deal or opportunity level.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to kinda see how that plays out because I could definitely see, especially if you're putting in the right keywords, you're putting in price, you're putting in discount, you're putting in they said no. I did work with a call insight software a few years back that was already doing that of like, it had the call recording. It wasn't as fine-tuned as things are now with AI, but it was pulling out all of that stuff to help coach. So, like, a sales manager could use it to coach the reps if the rep said the buzzword of discount. For an example, like they weren't allowed to give a discount, but if they said, "Oh, I'll give you a discount," he could flag that call and get it pulled to him, and then he'd be like, "No, that's not what we're doing." So I can see that same, happening between the both, that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. Okay. So shifting topics, comp plans aligned with forecasting goals. And I'm going to double click on this one. Should your forecast change mid year? How do you think about shifting comp plans, which when I say comp plans, really it's a caveat for quotas. So you think about rep quotas and forecasting and how one should impact the other.
I do feel and this is kind of like a HR catch, because if you bring somebody in as a sales rep and you're saying up front, "This is what we're doing, here's your comp plan," it would be very, very hard mid-year to change somebody's comp plan unless they're tanking. Then they're gonna be like, "Oh, yeah, if it's gonna benefit me, yes." But it would be very hard for me to go to a sales rep if our forecast is down, or we're not booking as much as we are, but they know that they're not gonna hit their targets all the way, but they're still gonna get comp. I think it could go either way. If you're going to change something, because 'cause we've done it, if you're gonna change something that's gonna benefit them because they don't have control over something else, we'll say, we've got a combination comp plan of different points. So we have changed things mid, but it was to benefit them because they were so mad and upset because they could not hit quota because of the way certain things that happened, and then you have those conversations. If it was the reverse impact, like you're doing it for a different reason, that it's gonna negatively impact them, I'm gonna be like, "No." Like, let's wait until, like, the next year, and then we write a new comp plan. So I think that depending upon what the business goals are and what direction that comp would change, because salespeople are driven by their quotas and their money. Like, they wanna make money, that's why they're in sales. So if it impacts them in a positive way, I'm for it. If it impacts them in a negative way, then I'm not gonna be the one having that conversation with them because I'm not making that decision. But I do think that it happens. I would say it's not off key to happen at some point.
Yeah. I think on the positive side, I mean, like, unless there's a massive windfall that, you know, which you can argue, like, should the reps even get credit? Or there's
Right.
other mechanics you should have built into your comp plan. But I guess specifically, maybe my question is more on like if your forecasting is so off that you need to adjust your forecast and bring it down. Now, if you bring the forecast down, but you don't bring the quotas down for the reps, there's an implication of like you
Right.
can potentially have attrition. So I think the changing there. But the follow on, which I think that part is easy, but then the thing maybe they think about is like, is that a slippery slope? Are we just setting it kind of a precedence that,
Hey, we'll change it up on you anytime we feel like it.
or yeah, they'll change it up. Well, they'll change it up to benefit you, right? If you only go the one direction, they'll change it up to benefit you if we're not performing. And so, not performing earlier in the year is just kind of seen as a blaming on forecasting versus blaming on the sales organization for hitting the number.
Well, that's a good point. I think too, your sales reps at that point. If they are really sandbagging and they're not hitting their quota on purpose because they're not doing the work, because they're not putting in the forecast, they're not building the pipeline, they're not doing the work, you're going to know that.
Well, this is the interesting piece is the sandbagging. Yes, like that is, I think that's the obvious. What's interesting is like when you know that the target is moving, like subconsciously, are you as motivated
No,
knowing? Yeah, right. So it's like if you know that you've made the move, so like how drastic of a change would it be before you're like, okay, we have to make?
I mean, because you don't want people to leave, right? You want to make people happy. You want them to do their jobs. So I think it is the balance of human and business and making that decision based on that. Because again, if you go into the year, and hypothetically, say you built your quota from the year previous and you had a stellar year,
Yeah,
been there, right? Stellar year last year, over goal, hit everything that as a company, as sales reps, everything. This year, with everything that has happened this year, we're seeing so many companies in the economy layoffs again. Nobody is hitting bookings. Quarter totals are down. We're affected by that also. So you kind of have to readjust, and relook at that stuff. We did not readjust quotas and goals, but we have readjusted plans. We have given, credit for certain things. We've adjusted things to make them whole because again, then you're dealing with a really sad sales team that don't want to be there anymore. And then the new reps that we brought on, we did readjust the goals for those new territories when they came in because we had to. We're like, okay, well, they're coming in the latter part of the year. We already know that we're not hitting goal. Now we need to readjust those where the original reps, they probably wouldn't have got a readjustment. So I think it is that fine balance of, again, as a sales leader, being able to look at your team and you want to keep them there, but a lot of the stuff is out of their control.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, it is a balance. I mean, it's exactly. There's no perfect. Hence the hot take. But
Right. Yeah.
I'm glad that we got to go through the segment. I think it's been great conversation. I think there's a lot to take away from here, and like maybe just to wrap up, some final questions. Any resources or any whether it's a sales management book or podcast or something that you think has benefited you around sales and sales operations and revenue operations that you'd like to share with the audience.
Sure. On the sales side, The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon. It's one of my favorite books. It's a go-to. It's a no-nonsense guide on sales. But I think on the RevOps part of it, if we're going to talk operations piece, the RevOps communities that are out there are many of them. If you're looking for any kind of something, I am prone to, I'll throw a question out there, be like, hey, has anybody else dealt with this? Hey, here's a situation I have. If it ChatGPT didn't give you an answer, then ask the rest of your community for answer. But I feel like in the space that we have resources, I'm available on LinkedIn. If anybody ever wants to DM me on LinkedIn and have a conversation. But I just think we have so many resources now with the availability of social media that you can, pretty much find what you're looking for. But I would lean in on whatever communities and people in your organization or network and stuff like that to find out anything and just continue learning. I'm constantly thank goodness for LinkedIn and everything that people post, like the podcast, the cheat sheets, people are making these PDF stuff. I'm constantly downloading and saving just to keep growing my tool belt so that I can refer back to anything, that I may need. And I'm prone to using all of those tools.
Yeah, 100%. And like it's like all you need is that one little trigger and it kind of opens up an idea and a path that you explore 100%.
Yeah, exactly.
And so on that note of kind of like connectivity and connecting with others in the community in the RevOps or sales ops world or sales comp world, is there someone that you'd most like to take out to lunch and what would you want to talk about?
So Mary Shea, she's the co-CEO of Mediafly. She used to be an outreach. She seems to always have an amazing perspective and it always seems to be ahead of the curve. So if I could get at anybody's ear or just have like an hour lunch to sit down with her and just pick her brain about stuff, I think that would be amazing. And it's so random because I went totally straight to somebody like that's been in operations. Now she's a co-CEO. But if you listen to any of her podcasts or any of the stuff that she puts out there, it's almost like she's predicting something that's happening in a weird way, but it always seems to be on point. I feel like she's giving me, like, insight that I can kinda move into and be like, "Hey, she said that, and it's happening." So
I'm gonna have to check it out. It's a good recommendation. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of the show and sharing all of your experience and wisdom. For those in the audience, as we all learn and hear these insights, we get better, we perform better, we elevate the entire function. So thank you for being on this show and sharing everything.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome. It's been fun. I love having these conversations. So thanks for having me.
The Sales Competition Show is brought to you by Forma AI, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma AI, visit our website at forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.